Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to our listeners from the Daily Brentford and Daily Wolves podcasts. I'm Lydia from Daily Brentford. Today we'll be previewing Saturday's clash at the G-Tech Community Stadium and giving our predictions. Today I'm joined by Chris from the Daily Wolves podcast. How are you, Chris?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
How's your weekend? We are recording this on a Monday.
We are. I mean, it was. I was going to tell you about my personal weekend then, but we're talking football, so I won't go there. It was. I mean, just obviously we had another defeat to Liverpool this time, but I'm sure we'll get onto it. But I think there's some light.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think seeing the highlights, because I was actually in Liverpool visiting my family. They all seem to think that Wolves had a very spirited performance, so that was good. As I mentioned, we are recording on a Monday and it happens to be International Podcast Day, which I only realised 10 minutes before starting this. So how have you been finding the Wolves podcast? Are there a lot of you in the team?
There are 3 of us on the team at the moment. It's good. It's good just to talk, about your favourite club every day and win or lose. It's just it's good to have the banter, isn't it? And have the chat and rant and rave, and if anything, it gives me a place to let it out. So
that's so true. Yeah. I feel like it gives me a place to let it out, especially considering people at work seem to be supporting, everyone always just happens to be supporting Man City or Arsenal. They don't understand what it's like to support a non-Big Six team. So I feel like this is a good outlet.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't really get that problem because I live so close to the ground, and the centre of Wolverhampton is very much, the club is the centre of the city. It's inherent through it. So it's luckily I'm not surrounded by many fans that aren't Wolves fans.
No, that sounds good. Everyone can share in your misery or happiness, depending on the weekend.
Yeah.
Just before we get going, guys, as I mentioned, it's International Podcast Day, and we are pretty new company, so we're looking for your support over the coming season and beyond as we look to bring you the best and most in-depth coverage across the entire network. Whether this is a like, subscribe, a comment, or a recommendation to your friends, we're very grateful to any support that we receive. So starting with the obvious, as you mentioned, Wolves are at the bottom of the table. Where do you think your main issues lie?
I mean, gosh, you need to go back and to listen to our last whole week of ranting. But I think the biggest part at the moment is that we can't close out games. Obviously, we have statistically got the toughest start to the season in terms of all the opposition we've faced. We've already faced Arsenal, Aston Villa, Newcastle, Liverpool, the list goes on.
Yeah.
So the one point we got was from Nottingham Forest away. And I think, Nottingham Forest in a good side anyway. And at their home ground, I think a lot of people will struggle to go there and get anything. So it seems really harsh from people that haven't watched our games, I think, as to where Wolves are and why they're in such a state. We should have definitely got more from those games. But there's been large periods of those games where we've been massively on top, and Newcastle, we were leading that game, and for about 70 odd minutes of that game, we dominated it. Should have had more goals, hit the post. We've just done everything, shut them down. And then there's a mixture of things. One is, I think, because we've on a bit of a losing streak now, the last couple of games, we've kind of crumbled in the last 15 minutes. Villa, all 3 of their goals were scored in the last 10 to 15 minutes when we were 1-0 up. Because the anxiety of trying to hold a lead is starting to, we drop deeper and deeper and deeper. And now they're starting to crumble as they're desperate to hold on because we can't close a game out. The other aspect of it is that there's a bit of discussion, very much on our pod anyway at the moment, about the fact that Gary O'Neill sets up really well for opposing teams in terms of, particularly in the first half, we're really strong because he obviously sets out a good ground plan of what's how to take them face on. And then at the moment, come the second half, there's been a few of those managers, particularly in these top clubs that we're playing, where obviously there's a lot of masterminds and things where the opposition is making good tactical changes in the second half to compensate Gary O'Neill's plan. Newcastle made 3 subs at half time because they were so under the cosh from us, and the 3 subs that they made really, really shifted the game. And Gary O'Neill didn't respond, so there's a lot of debate about at the moment that his substitutions are all coming quite late and they're very reactionary rather than being proactive in terms of keeping the pressure on and keeping things, like adapting to things on the fly. So there was a bit of a ramble, but
Yeah, no,
basically
it
we
makes
start
sense.
really strong and we can't
Yeah,
close out, and we're
yeah.
reacting, not sticking to it.
I think Brentford fans can definitely relate. I don't know if you saw the stat, but I think it was 3 consecutive games we scored in the first minute, which is quite impressive, but then doesn't always lead to a win. In fact, yeah, I think it was last season we were the team that was like leading the most and then going on to lose pretty much. So
Yeah.
I do think maybe it's lack of depth in the squad, or I think we tend to lose focus a bit and we're not as good as finishing, even though we do have those strong starts. So I think it kind of is, it'll be interesting to see how we both approach the game on Saturday, considering both teams are quite similar in that aspect. So,
Yeah, I think there's two things for us. One is that the problem now is that there's been a lot of discussion about the fact, oh well, when we get past these opening games of all the big teams, because after you guys we've got Man City, so no big deal. Like we'll have played like most of the big clubs, like quotation marks big clubs in the first few weeks, but that
yeah,
then the teams against the games against kind of mid-table down become more like cup games for us, because we're in a position now where the games that would be less pressured normal become like melting pots, because they're even more important now because we have
yeah,
so few points. And also that the other point I wanted to make was the fact that nearly all the managers of some of those teams have been like, oh, we didn't play great today, and it's normally because actually we've shut down the opposition for large periods. Both like Newcastle, we shut them down for a while. The Liverpool game, if you look at the stats, actually the shots on goal and everything are pretty much similar. And their winning goal was a penalty in the end, so it wasn't like they actually overran us in terms of
yeah.
scoring opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just going to be, I think it will be interesting to see how we fare against you. But given the fact that, as I say, we're in this position now where you can see the morale is obviously being hit a little bit, and like Lamina, our captain, was on the pitch crying at the end of the match the other day, which kind of blew everyone's mind a little bit because we're only 5 or 6 games in. But clearly he just really cares. So
Yeah, no, I mean, I was gonna ask, you've sort of answered it already. So, did your spirited performance against Liverpool give you hope for the rest of the season? Like, do you think you'll be in the pits of a relegation battle by the time it comes round to May?
I mean, it does give me hope. I'm Mr. Optimistic on our pod, if I can make that clear. So I'm the one who sees the light in the darkness. And so there's some people who are very much doom and gloom, think it's a ruined season, and are very scared of relegation, as I think is the same with all fan bases. There's always a split, and some get more panicky than others.
Yeah.
However, I do think there's been a lot of good signs. The fact that we are scoring goals, at least it's not like we're that would be horrible if we were losing and not scoring anything.
Yeah.
We are looking dangerous, at least on the one hand. We have got some really interesting signings that are still settling in. I mean, Andre, that we signed from a Brazilian club this summer. I know there's a bunch of the big clubs looking at him. He's looked outstanding in every game, and I think he's only going to get stronger. I mean, his first performance against us, he completed 100% of his passes. I think he did 40 passes, completed every single one, and he just looks so dominant in the centre. There's a lot of positives, but it's just really a case of whether we can shut up shop a bit at the back and just close out games, or at least if we can just close out a game, it's all going to be fine. But I do think not every week are we going to. Every game is tough in the league. Don't get me wrong. Every game is a game you can go and lose quite easily, but also every game is not going to be against Arsenal, Man City, and everyone else. So I do think we will get. It's a shame that on the one hand, this season, before the season started, we were like, we're going to be pushing for Europe, and now it's more a case of let's not get relegated. The target is maybe shifted, but I think we'll be safe.
Yeah, no, I definitely share that opinion. Because did you finish? Was it like mid-table 14th. Oh
Yeah,
no,
it was
it
like
was like
14th, 15th
yeah.
last season. And again, we were 7th or 8th for a while, and we were
Mm,
in that European hunt, and then we got decimated by injuries, and we were playing under 21s basically for the last
yeah.
4 games up front. So we had no
Mm,
wingers and no no strike up front. So it was just like, yeah, season's over.
yeah, no. As a Brentford fan, I think I can relate to injuries being a big issue. I think yeah, we haven't really got that depth of squad to necessarily perform as we could. We've
Hmm.
got, I don't know if you've seen Whistler's out now till late November,
Yeah,
and obviously he was when Tony left, we were looking like he was going to fill in that gap. And I think him and Brian paired up really nicely at the front. And it's such a shame that right when that, they were just showing Brentford's fine without Tony, this has now happened. So I think that obviously I still have faith in Brian. Like I think he's improving like season by season. It's just such a shame that Wiss is now injured right after losing Tony as well. So I
yeah.
don't know, it's probably good for you.
Well, hopefully, but we've got our own injuries going on at the moment, and because obviously we sold Max Kilman in the
Mm,
summer, and we didn't replace him in terms of bringing a new player in. The fan base felt that we wanted a replacement centre back brought in. Instead, we brought Mosquera back from loan, but then he now in his first few games has picked up an MCL and will be out for pretty much the entire season.
yeah.
And then Craig Dawson, our other starting centre back, was down with a stomach virus at the weekend. So our
Mm,
back two was completely different at the weekend.
mm,
And Totti came back from injury early to fill some of that void. And so basically, the back four is shifting because of injuries
yeah.
and illness and things. So similarly, with that is also a potential weakness and worry.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that. Did you see what Gary Neville said at the
About
weekend?
Wolves, or
Yeah,
no, I don't
about
think so.
I don't know. He was just. I think he was just getting frustrated at the last like 15 minutes of the Liverpool game. Which like, do you share that frustration? Or I mean, you mentioned loads of issues with the back four. Like, I think at some point, sometimes the pundits are a little too harsh and not really seeing the bigger picture.
The issue that everyone got frustrated with in the last, I don't know if that's what Gary Neville was talking about, but the last 10, 15 minutes of the Liverpool game was obviously by that point we're 2-1 down, and yet we'd looked fairly, if not always, cutting edge, we'd looked
Hmm.
fairly comfortable in possession and not struggling, and yet there was no urgency to get the ball forward. And in the last few minutes of added time, even when you should be really just trying to get the ball forward as quickly as you can to get an equalizer, the ball was
Yeah.
just kind of being passed from side to side at the back while they're still trying to play out from the back and look for the perfect ball forwards. And that isn't, sometimes, as much as everyone is trying to do this whole play out from the back thing and take your time and build up,
Hmm.
there's a moment sometimes where
Yeah.
you just got to move the ball forward,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
get it on the wing and get the ball in the box. We moaning that we've by that point he'd gone off, but we've got like a now I think Strand Larsen, our new striker, is something like 6'5". He's a big fella, and yet there's
Hmm.
hardly any crosses coming into the box. They're still playing a lot of. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's good on the ball on his feet, but there's moments where he's making great runs, and he's if someone just whipped in a ball early, he'd probably get on the end of it and have a couple more goals already, because
Yeah.
he's making some great positive moves, and they always then, instead of whipping the ball in, they'll just cut back and pass it around again. It's like, come on, just
Yeah.
just he's huge. Just put the
Mm.
ball in there. See if something happens. But anyway, I've
Yeah.
gone a
No,
bit
I
of a
think
rant.
with obviously Tony was like a legend for us, and I think his stature and his like height really was helpful at the front. And now we did make a new signing over the summer, kind of similar to you guys. He then got injured and he was basically out for the season since pre-season. So we kind of haven't been able to see any of his magic yet. So we're sort of left with a bit of like trepidation at the front, but that's okay. I'm sure we'll deal with it. Moving on to an ad now, and then we'll talk about the last time we met. The Global Sports Podcast Network is changing the face of football podcasts. With dedicated daily content for every Premier League team, women's football, fantasy football, and a daily Premier League wrap-up broadcast in 5 different languages, it's your one-stop shop for your daily football fix. Find GSPN wherever you find your usual podcasts. So, as I said, we'll be talking about the last time we met. it was a Brentford win 2-0. And how do you think, I mean, I guess I'll go on to, we've sort of talked about this with Brentford still having injury problems. Do you see this being flipped around? Do you think you could take this and win? I mean, you are desperate for a win. I think that always counts for something.
Yeah, I mean, we're desperate for a win. You never know. I feel like in the last season or two, we've played each other so many times. Was it
Yeah.
last season we had each other in the cup as well and made? I feel like there was a period of about a month where we met each other like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I can't remember when it was, but I remember seeing it
Yeah,
all the time.
yeah, it almost just became, there was a bit of fatigue about that. I'm sure you're all lovely, but it was like, come on again. Yeah, and during that time, so yeah, we may have lost the last one, but I feel like we've put in some good performances against you guys overall in that
Yeah.
period.
I think it was the game before, I think it was in the December. You guys beat us 4-2, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah,
And that was only a few months before.
Yeah, I think it's been a back and forth tie. So unlike Newcastle, where we up until recently we seem to draw every game 2-2. But yeah, so I think if it wasn't for our recent run of form, I would say it's normally a game that we'd definitely be in with a chance of taking something from. I've still got to be positive and think about the quality that we have. I've spoken, on the pod recently where we've been ranting and raving about how we should have been getting more from some of these games. That the moment there's very much people go in saying that we are, we're competing against these bigger clubs and that we're almost like lucky to get anything. But our starting lineup has 3 Brazilian internationals in the team, and there's some great quality throughout, even though the squad is maybe not the biggest. And so even with some injuries at the back, there's still no reason that we shouldn't be, playing, whether it's yourself or Crystal Palace or anyone else in that mid tier, that we shouldn't be looking to go away with the 3 points. So again, a very long-winded answer, but I'd say, there's got to be a chance. There's always a chance, right? Any given day.
I always think football brings up surprises. There's always a chance.
Yeah, we need the points. So yes, we've got to.
I feel like you can always tell like the desperation, and so this may be a game of many goals. That's what I predict anyway. Okay. I feel like we will be seeing a lot of goals on Saturday. So I was going to ask now, what Brentford players are you most worried about facing this weekend?
I mean, only because of the whole ex-player vibe, I have to say Nathan Collins, just because plus in the one cup game, I think it was a cup game where he gave away the ball and like had a terrible, shocking performance against us. And I think 2 of the goals that Hwang scored are because he just played out really badly.
I remember being so frustrated. I was like, has he forgotten that he's moved? Like, has he forgotten?
It was joyous, I have to say. But and Hwang still did a couple of good finishes in that game, despite those. But so yeah, I have to say purely because he's probably due a bit of karma back on us at some point. I know he plays at the back, but just it'd be typical because we've been weak at set pieces. A couple of our goals have come from not the initial set piece, but the fact that we're not then pushing out quick enough, and then it's the follow up, it's the motion action where we're not getting out and people are scoring on that second phase of play. So. If he's still up there for that period, knowing that that's where we've been really weak, I just know it's typical that the next player is going to come back and score a goal.
I feel like it would just be the way of football, just like the circle of life. After that, as you said, shocking performance. I feel like he owes us to show where his true loyalty lies now.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I'd say from our perspective, as you mentioned before, Hwang, I think he's one that we'll definitely have to watch out for. And yeah, I do remember that match. Obviously, there were a lot of Collins' mistakes, but I definitely remember seeing Hwang's quality then. I mentioned at the start of the episode, Brentford now are holding quite a fun record, I think, scoring in 3 consecutive games, scoring the first minute. Do you think this may continue on Saturday? Wow, I think why not?
I really hope not.
Thing is, even when we do, doesn't necessarily mean we win. So
That's
who
true.
knows?
That's true. But we've been, say, our first half performances have been arguably not arguably, they have been our strongest sections of the game. So I would hope that pattern will stop now, because the likelihood is we'll be awful in the last 15 minutes of the second half. So no, that will stop. I'm going to put my marker down on that one.
Okay, I'm going to say it will continue just so that we can definitely cement ourselves in history, because I think this is pretty special. So before we go on to our overall predictions, there's one more ad. Zencastr, built for quality, designed for growth, a new era for creation is here. The only complete audio and video platform to get best-in-class recording, intuitive editing, AI-powered growth features, and top-tier distribution tools all in one place. Get started for free. So, Chris, what's your overall score prediction for Saturday?
Gosh, given that, like I say, I think there will be goals, and I don't think, given troubles at the back with injuries and everything, that we won't keep a clean sheet.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't. It's just it's not possible. But I've got to say that we're going to get our first. I can't come on and say we're not going to get our first 3 points. I've got to be positive. So I'm going to say 2-1 to Wolves, because there's going to be goals.
Okay. I think there's going to be even more goals, and I think it's going to end up 3-2 to Brentford.
Okay.
That's my hope. Okay, so I normally, all the crossover episodes I've hosted have happened to be London derbies. And I normally ask a London derby question, but I thought I'd mix it up and ask any away day stories that you find particularly amusing or would like to share.
Oh my gosh. I haven't been to as many away games. I've been to some legendary ones in my time. I mean, plus obviously things like the playoff final, if you count that as an away day, that's pretty cool.
I count that as an away day.
Yeah, it was a great day, 2003. But I think, there's nothing quite like the trauma of going. I think it was, I can't remember if it was late 90s or early thousands. I think late 90s, when we were struggling, still praying we'd get into the Premiership one day, and going to the likes of Port Vale away on my own, with the small number of Wolves fans that made that mighty trip, to sit in the away end, praying that we would get the win, and that the other results would go our way to get in the playoffs of that summer, and just it all going a bit pear-shaped. I think we did win, and there was a mini pitch invasion at Port Vale.
Were you part of that pitch invasion?
I did not. I was keeping an eye on the other results, and I stood right near the edge. I was like, don't think it's worth it right now. And sure enough, it wasn't. We were like 1 point off or something, or goal difference.
Oh,
but yeah, there's nothing quite like the sadness of standing in Port Vale's ground. I love you, Port Vale, but of standing there and thinking, yeah, this is not our year.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't do that, join in the pitch invasion. Maybe one day you'll be joining in a Premier League winners pitch invasion at some point in the future. Who knows? Right, thanks so much for joining me today, Chris, and thanks to our listeners. As always, it really helps if you leave a rating on our Spotify or on Apple Music. And thanks for listening. See ya.
Bye.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.